On February 4th, 2016, at the University of Georgia, we had the distinct privilege at our special collections libraries to host a launch event for Dr. Patricia Bell Scott's book, The Firebrand and the First Lady. It was a remarkable evening. A standing room only crowd gathered in an outpouring of support for one of the university's own. The culmination, really the celebration of 20 years of effort by Dr. Bell Scott. Her book explores the friendship between Pauli Murry, a human rights activist, and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, drawing on letters and journals and diaries, published and unpublished manuscripts, interviews. She gives us the first close-up portrait of this evolving friendship, how it was sustained over time, what each gave the other, how their friendship changed the cause of American social justice. The New York Times Review of Books called it a tremendous book. For the Women's Review of Books, it is a vivid, detailed, compelling, and absorbing portrait of these two individuals and the era in which they lived. It's been featured on C-SPAN. There's a Washington Post notable book. Kirkus and Booklist called it Best Book of the Year, and our distinguished jury called it a Lillian Smith Book Award winner. Patricia Bell Scott is Professor Emerita of Women's Studies and Human Development and Family Sciences at the University of Georgia. Her previous books include Life Notes, Personal Writings by Contemporary Black Women, Flat-Footed Truths, Telling Black Women's Lives, and Double Stitch, Black Women Write About Mothers and Daughters. It was a joy to be with Dr. Bell Scott, to launch The Firebrand and the First Lady, and an even greater joy to be here today, 19 months later, to present Patricia Bell Scott with the South's oldest book award and one of the most coveted prizes given in social justice writing, the Lillian Smith Book Award. Please.
I want to thank the Southern Regional Council, the University of Georgia Libraries, the DeKalb County Public Library, Georgia Center for the Book, and Piedmont College for sponsoring the Lillian Smith Book Awards. I thank Dr. Toby Graham, University of Georgia Associate Provost and University Librarian, for his warm introduction, and I thank Ms. Jean Cleveland, Communications Director for the University of Georgia Libraries, for her part in facilitating the arrangements for today's program. Finally, I want to thank my husband, Charles Vernon Underwood, who's sitting right up front, and many of my friends and colleagues who are here today. Your support has been invaluable. I am deeply honored to be one of this year's recipients of the Lillian Smith Book Award. In fact, I am indebted to Lillian Smith on at least 4 accounts. First of all, her activism and support of Southern progressives, especially young people, demonstrated what it meant to be a woman of conscience. Second, her exemplary leadership as a white Southerner determined to fight for social justice on her home turf gave courage to others who could not and did not want to leave the South. Third, her contributions as a writer of deep psychological insight was a source of comfort to those grappling with the thorny interconnections of race, sex, and identity to white supremacy and misogyny. And fourth, I am indebted to Lillian Smith for her kindness and the hand of friendship she extended to the two women who are the subjects of my biography, the Firebrand and the First Lady. Without Lillian Smith, Pauli Murry and Eleanor Roosevelt would have been different people. Lillian Smith and Eleanor Roosevelt were women of the same generation. They shared democratic values, and they worked together in groups such as the NAACP, the Southern Conference for Human Welfare, the Rosenwald Fund, and the Americans for Democratic Action. The correspondence between them speaks of their efforts to mobilize women. For example, on December 14, 1943, during World War II, after discrimination in housing, employment, and the military had sparked riots in several urban centers, Smith wrote to Eleanor Roosevelt, "I've been trying for 6 or 7 years to prove to white Southern women of my social class that we can speak out plainly about racial democracy, that we can take a public stand against discrimination and even against segregation." Like Eleanor Roosevelt, who used her prestigious post as First Lady to advocate for civil rights, Smith wrote again to the First Lady, "I am known for my works with children of wealthy Southern families. I have a fortunate position in the South, and I have made the most of it." After the 1954 Brown decision, few politicians running for office in the South were willing to publicly endorse the Supreme Court ruling. But Lillian Smith audaciously backed a candidate in Georgia who did. That candidate, Grace Thomas, was an Atlanta attorney who ran for the Democratic nomination. Heartened by the prospect of a candidate who was female and who supported integration, Eleanor Roosevelt sent a contribution to the campaign. Thomas would lose, but in the end, Smith was convinced that the movement had made a small and important step forward. And on September 10, 1954, she wrote to Eleanor again. She said in that missive, "The old rule has been broken. A statewide politician did, for the first time since the Civil War, speak out for democracy and human rights. Her campaign will not be forgotten. My warmest thanks for your help. Maybe it was worth it just for the look that came on the youngsters' faces when they saw your check." Lillian Smith's support was vital to Pauli Murry as well. It was to Smith that a young Murry confessed that she faced a heart-wrenching dilemma, whether to become a writer or a lawyer. "I'm really a submerged writer," Murry wrote to Smith and her partner, Paula Snelling, "but the demands of the period have driven me into social action." This was a dilemma that Smith, a writer activist herself, knew all too well, and she would offer Murry support wherever she could. For example, Smith and Snelling published the first version of Murray's epic poem, Dark Testament, in their journal, South Today. That poem would become the title work in Murray's collection of the same name. Smith read multiple drafts of Murray's family memoir, Proud Shoes, and when Smith thought that Murray's narrative was becoming too academic, she would nudge Murray to be brave. In one letter, she wrote, "I want to spank you when you become the lawyer or the sociologist or begin using the technical jargon, which is not the work of an artist. So I scold hard to jolt you. Please don't cover up your heart and you're seeing mine." I love that line, "You're seeing mine. Feel it, imagine it, and all will be well." Eleanor Roosevelt and Pauli Murry were also impacted by Eleanor Smith's books. In 1956, during a critical period of Adlai Stevenson's presidential campaign, the First Lady sent Stevenson a copy of Killers of the Dream, Lillian Smith's penetrating critique of Southern racism. The First Lady did this because she was hoping that this would help to broaden Stevenson's understanding of the race problem. In the day before Murry had thyroid surgery, she lay in her hospital bed reading Lillian Smith's The Journey. Murry, who was overwhelmed with a concern for friends who had been summoned to testify before the McCarthy Committee, and she was also worried about herself, worried that she might be next, kept reading over and over a passage from The Journey. Smith had written in that passage, and it was all about fear, this passage, which I want to share with you, which says, "But how hard it is when we're struggling with fears, to think beyond ourselves and the present moment. Even the most responsible of us is not in a learning mood on those days, days which sometimes stretch into years, years when the quiet voice of reason is drowned out by the cries of the terrorized child within us." When Murray's elderly aunts died, she turned to Eleanor Roosevelt and Lillian Smith for solace. Murry lobbied the NAACP to change its selection criteria for the Spingarn Award, which is the association's highest honor. And that selection criteria requires that one be African American. And Murry, in her usual fashion, took on the chairman of the board, and she told him that it was philosophically and morally wrong that the Spingarn should be denied to women like Eleanor Roosevelt and Lillian Smith. In 1962, Murry paid tribute to Smith again in an address entitled "Grace Under Pressure," given at an annual meeting of the National Council of Negro Women. She borrowed the title of that speech from Ernest Hemingway, who coined the phrase "grace under pressure" to explain what he meant by courage. "It took grace under pressure," Murry told the audience, "for astronauts to brave the unknown and open a new frontier, for James Meredith to enroll as the first Black student at the University of Mississippi under military guard, for Rosa Parks to refuse to give up her seat to white passengers on a Montgomery bus, knowing that she would be arrested, and for Lillian Smith to write about the psychosis of white supremacy and align herself with the civil rights movement. As women of conscience," Murry told the audience, "we have the responsibility of carrying on the great pioneering tradition of the valiant women who have gone before. In closing, it is with gratitude that I accept this award and pay homage to the support Lillian Smith, Pauli Murry, and Eleanor Roosevelt gave each other. May we be nourished by their writings, imbued with their compassion, inspired by their example, and energized by their perseverance." Thank you.